Why was the medic lying in the dirt with one hand clamped around a tourniquet and the other calmly guiding a sniper's aim? The mountain air was thin and sharp. Sloane Mercer barely felt it in her lungs anymore. Adrenaline had replaced oxygen minutes ago. Harlow was bleeding beside her. Not just bleeding, flooding. Her right hand twisted the tourniquet tighter around his upper thigh, the windlass biting down against muscle and cloth. Blood soaked through his uniform anyway, dark and fast, but it was slowing. It had to slow. Her left arm extended toward the rocky ridge across the valley. Not waving. Pointing. "Eastern wall," she said quietly. 15 meters away, Briggs lay behind a fallen tree, the heavy rifle balanced across its bipod. The big weapon looked almost absurd in his hands, like a cannon pretending to be a rifle. "I don't have the angle," he muttered. "You do," Sloane replied. Her voice wasn't loud, just precise. 6 inches up your position. Gap in the rock, he's settling. Harlow groaned beside her. She didn't look down. "Not yet." "1," she said. Briggs shifted. 2. Wind brushed across the grass. 3. The rifle cracked. The ridge went silent. Only then did Sloane lower her hand and look down at the man bleeding beneath it. His face had gone pale, the dangerous pale that comes when the body starts giving up blood faster than it can fight. She checked his pulse. Still there. Rapid, thin. Alive. "Nobody dies today," she said. Harlow stared at her for a long second. "Okay," he whispered. And somehow he believed her. Briggs' voice drifted across the open ground. "What are you?" Sloane didn't answer. 72 hours earlier she had been a nurse. Just a nurse. The ICU at Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, was quiet at 4 in the morning. Not peaceful quiet. Machine quiet. Breathing tubes, cardiac monitors, pumps counting seconds. Sloane Mercer had worked those halls long enough to understand their language. And that night the language had changed. The sound came from room 7. Not an alarm. A shift. A subtle difference in rhythm. Most people would have ignored it. Sloane didn't. She was already moving when the monitor changed again. The patient was a 61-year-old cardiac recovery case, routine, stable. Until the moment he was. His lung had collapsed. Not dramatically, quietly. Pressure building inside the chest cavity, crushing the lung, pushing against the heart. Tension pneumothorax. The kind that kills before a doctor can finish walking down the hallway. Sloane didn't page anyone. She grabbed the decompression needle from the supply cart. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. 38 seconds later the trapped air hissed out, and the man gasped like someone surfacing from deep water. By the time the attending physician arrived, the monitor had returned to normal. He looked at the patient. Then at Sloane. "You did the procedure?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He studied the chart. Then nodded once. "Good work." And left. No celebration. No congratulations. Just quiet competence. But that wasn't the incident that got her fired. 3 weeks earlier, a patient named Leonard Doyle had died. 53 years old. Retired schoolteacher. His wife brought him a magazine every afternoon between 2 and 4. Always the same gentle smile, always the same hopeful routine. Sloane remembered the empty room the morning after he died. Something felt wrong. So during lunch she read the chart. Slowly, carefully, line by line. The mistake was almost invisible. Morphine dosage. Just slightly outside the prescribed range. But Sloane had spent 4 years as a Navy corpsman, before becoming a civilian nurse. She knew how small errors killed. The extra morphine had suppressed Doyle's breathing. His weakened heart couldn't compensate. And by the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. Sloane sat in the break room for a long time. Then she filed the report. She named the error. She named the dosage. And she named the physician who ordered it. Dr. Calloway. The meeting with administration lasted 7 minutes. The administrator spoke in gentle corporate language. Staffing reevaluation. Department restructuring. Workforce optimization. Then he slid an envelope across the desk. Termination. Sloane walked out of the hospital with her stethoscope in her bag and her father's photograph in her pocket. Her father had died in Afghanistan 12 years earlier. Force recon. He once told her something on a cold November night when she was 12. The hardest part of doing the right thing, he'd said, is when it costs you. She understood that now. The next morning she ran 6 miles along the river before sunrise. Running had always quieted her mind. That day it didn't. She returned to her apartment, brewed coffee, and started writing everything she remembered about Leonard Doyle's chart. Every number, every timestamp, every detail. She was halfway through the 3rd page when she heard the helicopter. At first she assumed it was news traffic. Then the sound deepened. Lower, heavier, military. She stepped to the window. A Black Hawk descended into the parking lot of her apartment building. 4 men stepped out. 3 young, 1 older. The older man studied her calmly. "Sloane Mercer?" he asked. "Yes." "Master Chief Garrett Drummond," he said. "I served with your father." The morning air suddenly felt very still. "Our team medic lost 2 fingers this morning," Drummond continued. "Occupational accident. He's out for 3 months." He paused. "We deploy in 94 hours. Sloane crossed her arms. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I don't carry a weapon." "I know exactly what you are," Drummond replied. "I don't need a weapon." He handed her an envelope. Her name was written on the front, in handwriting she hadn't seen in 12 years. Her father's. The postmark read September 2012. 1 month before he died. Drummond watched quietly. "He gave that to me before his last deployment," he said. "Told me to wait for the right moment." Sloane opened the letter. She read it without speaking. When she finished, something in her face changed. Not hardened. Settled. "What medical supplies?" she asked. Drummond nodded slightly. "Level 2 trauma kit, full pharmacology load." She slipped the letter into her jacket. "I configure the medical bag," she said. "Full authority on triage decisions." "Agreed." She looked toward the helicopter. "I need to call my mother first." 7 minutes later she hung up. Then she climbed into the aircraft. As the helicopter lifted into the morning sky, Sloane placed her hand briefly over the pocket where her father's letter rested. Not for comfort. For confirmation. It was still there. And somehow so was he. Why was the new medic studying the mountain map more carefully than the soldiers who had climbed it before? The briefing room smelled like dust, metal, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Sloane Mercer stood at the edge of the table, listening. Drummond spoke calmly, moving a finger across satellite photos spread beneath the overhead lights. "Telecommunications relay station," he said. "Eastern Honduran foothills, elevation 1,100 meters." 3 civilian technicians had been kidnapped from the site 4 days earlier. The group holding them wasn't ideological. Just organized crime with military equipment. The worst kind of enemy. Minimal discipline, Drummond said, but good weapons. Sloane watched the terrain map. Ridges, tree lines, access road. Then she noticed something else. A saddle in the mountain ridge, about 800 meters from the relay station. A sniper's dream. She traced the line silently with her eyes. No one else mentioned it. Briggs stood across the table. Tall, lean, eyes sharp with permanent skepticism. He asked her polite questions about medical procedures. Tourniquet placement. Shock management. Medication load. Every question carried a subtle tone. Not hostility. Doubt. She recognized it. Infantry units had treated her the same way when she was a corpsman. Trust wasn't given. It was earned. Later that afternoon, she saw Harlow running the readiness course. He finished last. Not unusual. But his gait was wrong. His right ankle had rolled slightly. He was compensating with his left knee. In 24 hours, that knee would swell. On a mountain slope that could become mission-ending. She caught him near the water station. Sit down. He raised an eyebrow. It's fine. It's fine now, she said. Tomorrow it won't be. He sat. She taped the ankle carefully, wrapping the joint in a figure-8 compression pattern. When he stood again, he took a few steps. That's different. Keep weight centered, she said. He nodded slowly. Thanks, Doc. From across the field, Weston had been watching. Later he passed her in the warehouse and murmured quietly. Good call. 2 words. But from Weston, they meant everything. Briggs remained distant. On the second day, he suggested a quick demonstration. Just so everyone's clear on tourniquet protocol. Sloane picked up a tourniquet. Without warning, she placed her right arm behind her back. Then applied the device to her own thigh. One-handed. 11 seconds. She tightened the windlass and locked it. Then looked at Briggs. We're clear, she said. The room went silent. Drummond said nothing. But something had shifted. They moved out before dawn the next morning. 2 hours of climbing. Humidity thick. Breath steady. The relay station appeared slowly through the trees. A squat building, 2 outbuildings, a generator shed. 2 guards by a barrier. Drummond signaled. Weston and Briggs moved toward the south entrance. Drummond and Harlow advanced toward the building. Sloane stayed 30 meters back. Watching. Listening. The breach was clean. Radio chatter stayed calm. Then the shot came. High ground. Northwest ridge. Drummond's voice cut through the radio. Sniper northwest. Harlow's voice followed. I'm hit. Sloane didn't wait. She ran to the position where the team's long rifle had been staged. The Barrett lay on its bipod. 30 pounds of steel and precision. Briggs' voice snapped over the radio. Doc, don't. Drummond interrupted. Briggs, hold your position. Sloane dropped behind the rifle. The scope filled with rock and shadows. She didn't look for the shooter. She looked for the position. Then she saw it. A faint thermal shimmer from a rifle barrel. 800 meters. Her father had taught her this rifle when she was 16. He had spent 3 hours explaining wind, gravity, patience. Then he had let her shoot. She exhaled halfway. Squeezed. The first shot went high. 8 inches. She knew instantly. She adjusted. Waited. The sniper shifted. She fired again. The ridge went quiet. For a moment no one spoke. Then Briggs' voice crackled through the radio. Who made that shot? Drummond emerged from the building with 3 hostages. He looked at Sloane, then at the rifle, then back at her. "Shoulder," he asked Harlow. "Grazed." Sloane already knew. She moved him toward the trees and treated the wound quickly. Drummond crouched beside her. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father," she said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. But the mission wasn't over yet, and the mountain still had one more surprise waiting. Why did the hostage suddenly recognize the medic who had just saved his life? The sun hadn't fully risen yet when the man spoke. Sloane was finishing the bandage on Harlow's shoulder when she felt someone watching her. One of the rescued technicians, older than the others. Gray hair, sharp posture. Not the posture of a telecom worker. The posture of someone used to authority. He studied her face. Then his expression changed. "Mercer," he said slowly. Sloane looked up. "Yes." He hesitated. For a moment he looked almost uneasy. "Are you Cole Mercer's daughter?" The question landed softly in the morning air. Wind rustled through the tall grass along the tree line. "Yes," Sloane said. The man looked down at the dirt. Something passed across his face, guilt maybe, or memory. "My name is Ashford," he said. "Lieutenant Colonel James Ashford, Naval Medical Command." Sloane waited. Ashford swallowed once. "I signed your termination notice." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Sloane returned her attention to Harlow's bandage. "I know," she said quietly. Ashford didn't answer. 20 minutes later, the team prepared to move. Extraction would take them down the northeastern slope to a vehicle pickup point in a ravine 2 kilometers away. Before they left, Drummond found Sloane sitting on a rock near the edge of the trees. Blood soaked through the back of her shirt. He frowned. "You're hit." "Graze," she said. "Through the trapezius." "You should have said something." "It didn't affect the shot." Drummond pressed gauze against the wound. For a minute they watched the distant ridge where the sniper had fallen. Then Drummond spoke again. "There's something you should know about your father." Sloane didn't move. "He didn't die the way the notification report says." Her jaw tightened. Drummond continued quietly. "Vehicle interdiction, Helmand Province. Your father took a round to the upper thigh." Sloane felt the air leave her lungs slowly. "Femoral artery," Drummond said. "Not a large wound. Survivable with immediate treatment." He paused. There was no medic at Fob Dwyer that morning. The words settled heavily between them. "The unit medic had been evacuated the day before," Drummond said. "The replacement hadn't arrived." Sloane stared at the mountains. "How long?" she asked. 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes. Her father had bled out in the time it took to boil a kettle. In the time it took a person to tie their boots. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "That's why you came to find me," she said. "Partly," Drummond admitted. "And because he asked me to." She nodded once. Grief didn't arrive as tears. It arrived as direction. A quiet determination forming somewhere deep inside her chest. She stood up. "Let's move." They descended the mountain quickly. Extraction mode now. Fast, controlled. The vehicles waited below in a shallow ravine. Harlow walked ahead despite the wound. Ashford moved beside the other hostages. Everything seemed under control. Then Sloane heard the sound. Not a shot. Something else. A shift in the air. The way silence compresses just before violence returns. She looked up. A figure moved along a rock shelf above the ravine. Second sniper. He had waited. Patient. watching the extraction route. The shot cracked. Harlow dropped instantly. Sloane reached him in 6 steps. Blood exploded from the wound in his thigh. Bright, arterial, femoral artery. Her father's wound. Her father's death. But not today. Tourniquet out. Around the thigh. Windlass turning. Harlow grabbed her arm. Don't let me die. Sloane tightened the device until the bleeding slowed. Nobody dies today, she said. Then she looked up at the rock shelf and raised her hand toward Briggs. Eastern wall, she said calmly. And the mountain held its breath. Why did the sniper trust the medic's directions without questioning them? Briggs didn't hesitate this time. The moment Sloane pointed toward the eastern rock shelf, he shifted behind the rifle. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't question the distance. Somewhere in the past 72 hours, his skepticism had quietly transformed into something else. Trust. Distance, he asked. 680, Sloane replied. Wind dropping. Her right hand stayed clamped around Harlow's tourniquet. Blood had soaked into her sleeve. She ignored it. He moved left 20 feet, she continued calmly. Above the rock gap. Briggs adjusted his position. I see the gap. Count of 3, Sloane said. The sniper above them shifted again. Looking for targets. Looking for the wounded man on the ground. 3. Harlow squeezed Sloane's forearm. 2. The wind brushed the ravine grass. 1. The Barrett roared. The echo rolled across the valley. Then silence. The silhouette above the rocks disappeared. Sloane finally looked down again. Harlow's pulse was still there. Weak, but steady. You did that with one hand, he muttered. The other one was directing Briggs, she said. He let out something that might have been a laugh. The team moved fast after that. Within 11 minutes, everyone reached the vehicles hidden under camouflage netting. Harlow was lifted into the back seat. Tourniquet marked with a black marker. Time of application written clearly. Exactly the way it was supposed to be done. Drummond drove. Sloane rode shotgun with her medical kit open across her knees. Every 5 minutes she checked Harlow's pulse. Every 10 minutes she rechecked the bleeding. The road twisted through jungle foothills. 45 minutes later, they reached the forward operations site. Inside the warehouse, Sloane turned a briefing table into a surgical station. She worked for 2 hours straight, removing the tourniquet slowly, monitoring the artery, cleaning the wound, packing gauze, starting IV fluids. Weston rigged a paracord line from the ceiling to hang the fluid bag. He didn't say anything. He just did it. When Sloane finished, Harlow was stable. Not comfortable, but alive. She wrote clinical notes carefully on a legal pad. Every intervention, every timestamp, every observation. Documentation mattered. It always had. Ashford appeared in the doorway. How is he? He asked. Stable, Sloane said. He nodded slowly, then stepped into the room. I want to explain the termination. You don't have to. I do. He clasped his hands behind his back. Your report about Dr. Calloway was correct. I believed that immediately. But he has connections. Sloane said nothing. A formal investigation would create institutional exposure, Ashford continued. Some people consider that the real problem. She met his eyes. Leonard Doyle's wife brought him a magazine every day. Ashford lowered his gaze. Yes, he said. The report you filed is still on record, Sloane added. Yes. Then the system has what it needs. He studied her quietly. You put a tourniquet on a man's femoral artery today while directing sniper fire with the other hand, he said. I will correct what happened to you. She didn't thank him. She simply nodded once. Later that evening, the team gathered outside the warehouse. The sun sank slowly over the Honduran mountains. Drummond handed Sloane a folder. After action report, he said. She read it. Every event documented precisely. Every decision recorded. He had written her actions exactly as they occurred. You included the first shot, she said. I included both. The first one missed. The first one established wind and distance under combat conditions. He looked at her. People who never miss usually aren't shooting at hard targets. She handed the report back. What happens next? She asked. Drummond watched the darkening valley. I'm recommending a new designation, he said. Integrated combat medic. She raised an eyebrow. It means when we need someone who can both save lives and fight, we already know who that person is. She thought about that quietly. About her father. About 4 minutes. About the mountain ridge going silent. Okay, she said. What did the sniper say to the medic when no one else was listening? Briggs was cleaning the Barrett rifle when Sloane entered the warehouse. He didn't look up immediately. The cloth moved slowly across the steel receiver. Precise. Methodical. Finally he spoke. The angle from my position on the eastern wall. Sloane waited. You were right, he said. I didn't see it until you pointed out the reference gap. He set the cloth down. You had that position mapped while stopping arterial bleeding. With one hand. She shrugged slightly. Training. Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then exhaled. I owe you an apology. For the parking lot. For the flight. For the first 2 days. She leaned against the table. What happened? She asked. He hesitated. Previous rotation, he said. Our medic missed something. A teammate almost died. His jaw tightened. So when Drummond told me another medic was joining. You assumed the worst. Yes. Silence lingered between them. Finally Sloane spoke. Buy me coffee when we're back. We'll call it even. Briggs nodded. Then added quietly. The second shot. Moving target. 14-knot crosswind. 1,100 meters. He paused. Your father would have been proud. Sloane allowed herself a small smile. He would have told me the wind correction was 2 minutes too conservative. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Was it? Probably. Weston approached later that evening. He placed something on the table in front of her. A worn Force Recon patch. Edges faded. Thread softened by years of wear. Drummond carried it since Helmand, Weston said. He said your father would want it given at the right moment. Sloane stared at the patch for a long time. Your father's work didn't end when he died, Weston continued quietly. It became you. She picked up the patch. It weighed almost nothing. And somehow everything. Why did 18 young medics sit in silence when Sloane Mercer walked into the classroom? 6 months later, the classroom at Bethesda Naval Medical Center smelled like fresh paint and dry erase markers. 18 Navy corpsmen sat at long tables. Some curious, some skeptical, all waiting. Sloane stood at the front of the room. On the whiteboard behind her, she had written 3 words. Integrate. Adapt. Bring them home. Frell sat in the front row, taking notes already. Harlow sat in the back, walking normally again. The surgeons had repaired the femoral artery cleanly. He had insisted on attending the class. Not as a student. As proof. Sloane rested her hands on the table. "This course is called Integrated Combat Medicine," she said. "You've read the curriculum. But I want to start by telling you what it is." She paused. "It isn't about turning medics into soldiers. It isn't about turning soldiers into medics." She looked around the room. "It's about understanding that in the field, those jobs sometimes become the same job." She turned to the whiteboard, then wrote another sentence beneath the others. "Heal when you can, fight when you must." "My father taught me that when I was 12, she said. "And everything in this course grows from that idea." She faced the room again. "Sometimes you'll have 4 minutes to save a life. Sometimes less." The corpsmen listened. No skepticism now. Just attention. "Your job," she continued quietly, "is to make those minutes count." After class, Sloane drove back to Chesapeake. Her apartment felt different now. Less temporary. Her father's photograph stood on the kitchen table. The Force Recon patch hung framed on the wall. She poured coffee and sat down with her notes. Her phone buzzed. "Drummond." "How was the first session?" he asked. 18 students, she said. "Good ones." "I heard Harlow spoke." "He did." A pause. "I'm sending you a briefing document," Drummond said. "Situation developing overseas. 4 to 6 weeks out." Sloane looked at the photograph of her father. The same grin. The same squint against sunlight. "I'll read it tonight," she said. After the call ended, she sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the mountain, about Patricia Doyle and the magazines, about a man who died in 4 minutes because knowledge wasn't there, and about 18 corpsmen who might someday carry that knowledge into a place where someone desperately needed it. She picked up her pen. Outside, the night was still. Morning would come, and mornings always ask something of us. The only question is whether we're ready to answer. Sometimes courage is loud. Sometimes it fires rifles and shouts orders. But sometimes it simply kneels in the dirt beside a wounded man, tightens a tourniquet, and calmly tells the world, "Nobody dies today." Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the quiet medic keep staring at the ridge on the satellite map, as if she already knew where the danger would come from? The briefing room was colder than the morning outside. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above a long metal table scattered with maps, tablets, and half-empty coffee mugs. Sloane Mercer stood at the edge of the room. No one had told her to sit. No one had told her not to. So she stayed where she was, hands resting loosely behind her back, listening. Master Chief Garrett Drummond moved his finger slowly across the satellite image projected onto the screen. "Primary objective," he said calmly, "is the recovery of 3 civilian engineers taken from the telecommunications relay station here." His finger tapped a square structure halfway up a steep Honduran mountainside. "Satellite link hub, remote, limited road access." He paused. "Kidnappers are likely cartel contractors, not ideological, just paid." That part bothered Sloane more than ideology would have. People who believed in something could be predicted. People who believed in nothing could not. Briggs leaned over the table, studying the map through narrowed eyes. "How many holding them?" "Unknown," Drummond replied. "Estimate 6 to 8. Weston sat quietly, arms crossed, absorbing details without speaking. Sloane watched the terrain instead of the people. That had always been her habit. Look at the environment first, the humans inside it second. Mountains curved like folded cloth around the relay compound. Dense jungle filled the lower slopes. A single gravel access road cut up the western side. but it was the ridge on the northeast side that held her attention. A narrow saddle between two high points. Perfect overwatch. Perfect sniper ground. She leaned slightly closer to the screen. No one else mentioned it. Drummond continued. Team insertion by helicopter. Drop point here. His finger landed on a clearing nearly 2 kilometers away. Foot movement to objective. Harlow scratched his beard. Extraction. Vehicle staged in a ravine east of the ridge. Sloane's eyes returned to the saddle again. Her stomach tightened slightly. Something about that ground felt unfinished, like a sentence missing its final word. But she said nothing. New people rarely spoke first in rooms like this. Trust had to be earned before opinions mattered. The meeting ended with a quiet scraping of chairs. Gear lists, radio checks, ammunition allocations. Everyone moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Sloane stayed behind for a moment, studying the ridge one last time. Then she left the room. Outside, the training compound was already alive. Helicopter rotors thundered somewhere beyond the hangars. Operators jogged across the gravel yards carrying equipment cases. Someone was shouting times for a conditioning run. The place smelled like engine oil and dust baked under the sun. Sloane felt oddly calm. It reminded her of her corpsman days. Movement, purpose, quiet urgency. Inside the equipment warehouse, she began assembling her medical kit. Trauma shears, tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, IV lines, pain management drugs. Every item had a place. Every place had a reason. She packed slowly, checking each tool twice. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Briggs. He leaned against a steel shelf, arms crossed. You carry morphine? He asked. Yes. How many doses? 8. What if you have 10 casualties? I triage. He studied her for a moment. Fair answer. He walked closer and picked up a tourniquet from the table. Application time. Depends on conditions. Average. Under 15 seconds. He twirled the strap once in his fingers. Show me. Sloane didn't argue. She took the tourniquet back, then placed her left arm behind her back. Briggs raised an eyebrow. One hand only. She looped the strap around her thigh. Pulled. Twisted the windlass. Locked it. 11 seconds. She released the pressure and set the device down. Briggs didn't smile, but the skepticism in his eyes softened slightly. Not bad, he said. Practice, Sloane replied. He nodded once and left. Not approval, but not doubt either. It was a start. Later that afternoon, Sloane walked past the training field. Harlow was halfway through the obstacle course. He vaulted a wooden barrier, landed awkwardly, and kept running. But Sloane noticed something small. A hitch in his step. Right ankle. Subtle. Barely visible unless you knew how to look. She watched him finish the course. He slowed near the water station, stretching his legs slightly. She walked over. Sit. He blinked at her. I'm fine. You rolled it. Did not. You did. He sighed. Doc. Sit. Something in her voice made him listen. He lowered himself onto a bench. She crouched beside him and gently rotated the ankle. Ligament strained. Not torn. But tomorrow the joint would swell. Badly. Lucky, she said. He smirked. That's me. She pulled athletic tape from her kit. Wrapped the ankle carefully. Figure 8 pattern. Compression without cutting circulation. When she finished, he stood and tested his weight. The difference was immediate. "Well," he said slowly, "that's impressive. Keep your stride shorter on slopes," she said. "You compensate with the left knee." He stared at her. "You watching all that from across the field?" "Yes." He laughed softly. "Remind me not to limp around you." Weston had been standing nearby the entire time. When Sloane walked away, he spoke quietly. "Good catch." 2 words. Simple. But coming from Weston, they carried weight. Trust was beginning to move through the team like slow-warming sunlight. Not fully there, but rising. That evening they ran live drills. Room clearing. Communication signals. Emergency casualty extraction. Sloane practiced dragging a 200-pound dummy through a doorway while applying pressure to a simulated wound. Sweat soaked through her shirt. Her shoulder burned. But she kept going. Across the room, Briggs fired controlled bursts at moving targets. Precise, unhurried. At one point he glanced toward her. Just for a moment. Assessing. Reevaluating. After the drill ended, the team gathered around the map table again. Drummond reviewed the final approach route. 2 hours uphill, he said. Silent movement. He tapped the map once more. Sloane's eyes drifted again to the saddle ridge. Finally she spoke. Quietly. "Sir." Drummond looked up. "Yes." She pointed at the map. "That ridge." Briggs leaned forward. "The saddle." "Yes." "Why?" "Best overwatch position." Weston nodded slowly. 800 meters from the compound, he said. Clear line of sight. Drummond studied the satellite image. "You think they'll post a sniper there?" "I would," Sloane said. Silence settled over the table. Not dismissive. Thinking. Briggs finally spoke. "She's right." Drummond nodded once. "We'll stage the Barrett on the approach path," he said. Then he looked at Sloane again. "Good eye." The meeting ended soon after. But something subtle had changed. Her voice had entered the conversation. Later that night, Sloane sat alone outside the barracks. Stars filled the sky above the dark hills. She held the letter from her father in her hands. The paper was worn now from being unfolded so many times. She read the final line again. "Not for comfort. For clarity. If the moment ever comes when people need you more than they doubt you, go." She folded the letter carefully. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere far away, a helicopter passed across the sky. Sloane looked toward the dark horizon. Toward mountains she hadn't seen yet. Toward a ridge that waited quietly in the dark. And deep down she felt something strange. Not fear. Not excitement. Recognition. As if the path ahead had been waiting for her long before she ever stepped onto it. But there was still something she hadn't told them. Not yet. And when the moment came, everything would change. Why did the rescued hostage suddenly stare at the team's medic, as if he recognized her from somewhere he wished he did? The jungle was still shaking from the echo of the shot when Sloane Mercer lowered the rifle. Her shoulder burned where the recoil had slammed into it. The Barrett wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for distance, power, and final decisions. Across the valley, the ridge where the sniper had been hiding had gone quiet. Too quiet. Briggs kept his scope trained there anyway. "Movement?" Weston asked quietly through the radio. "Negative," Briggs replied. "He's done." Drummond's voice came a moment later. "Compound secure." Sloane exhaled slowly. Only then did she realize how tight her chest had been. She stood and moved toward the compound, the heavy rifle still warm in her hands. Her boots crushed gravel as she crossed the open ground. The building was smaller than it had looked on the satellite map. Concrete walls, metal roof, satellite dishes rising like strange flowers above it. 2 cartel guards lay motionless near the gate. Inside, the air smelled like sweat, dust, and fear. Weston stood near the doorway watching the road, while Drummond cut plastic restraints from 3 men sitting against the wall. The hostages blinked in the sudden light. Disoriented, exhausted, alive. Sloane immediately shifted into medical mode. She crouched beside the first man. Mid-40s, malnourished, dehydrated. Pulse elevated but steady. "You're okay," she said softly. He nodded weakly. The second hostage had a broken finger that had healed badly. The bone had set crooked, probably from being slammed in a door. Painful but not life-threatening. The third man watched her carefully as she approached. Older, maybe 60. Sharp eyes behind exhaustion. There was something about the way he studied her that made Sloane pause. Recognition. But she was certain she had never seen him before. "Are you injured?" she asked. "No." His voice was hoarse but controlled. She checked his pulse anyway. Strong. Professional habit. But the man kept staring. His eyes moved across her face slowly, as if comparing it to a memory. "Your Navy," he said. "Yes." He hesitated. Then he said the name quietly. "Mercer." The word hit her like a distant echo. "Yes," she said cautiously. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like someone who had just discovered a ghost sitting in front of him. Cole Mercer's daughter. Her heart skipped once. "How do you know my father?" The man swallowed. "My name is Ashford," he said slowly. "Lieutenant Colonel James Ashford, Naval Medical Command." Something cold moved through Sloane's chest. She knew that name. Not personally, but from paperwork. From the document she had been forced to sign 3 weeks earlier. Ashford looked away for a moment. Then he said the words quietly. "I was the one who signed your termination." The room seemed to shrink slightly. For a second, Sloane said nothing. Not because she didn't know what to say. Because she knew exactly what she could say, and none of it would change anything. So she simply returned to her work. She checked his pupils, examined his wrists where the restraints had cut into his skin. "You're dehydrated," she said calmly. "I'll get fluids in you when we reach extraction." Ashford stared at her. "You saved my life." She didn't look up. "That's the job." Across the room, Harlow leaned against the wall, with a hand pressed to his shoulder wound. "Doc," he called. "Come take a look at this before it starts complaining louder." Sloane stood and crossed the room. The bullet had grazed the muscle cleanly. Painful, but lucky. Very lucky. She cleaned the wound quickly and wrapped it with fresh gauze. "You'll live," she said. Harlow grinned. "Good, I had dinner plans next week." But the moment didn't last. Drummond's voice came through the radio. "Movement on the ridge." Briggs answered. "Negative, still clear." Sloane glanced toward the open doorway. Toward the mountains. Toward the ridge she had noticed during the briefing. Something about the silence there felt unfinished. Like a storm that had paused instead of ended. "Extraction route?" Weston asked. 2 clicks northeast, Drummond replied. "Vehicles in the ravine." They moved out quickly. Hostages in the center. Operators forming a protective perimeter. Sloane walked beside Harlow, keeping an eye on his wound while scanning the terrain. The jungle was loud again now. Birds. Insects. Wind moving through leaves. But beneath it, she felt a strange tension. like the land itself was holding its breath. Halfway down the slope, Ashford spoke again. Quietly this time. "I read your report about Leonard Doyle." Sloane kept walking. "Did you?" "It was accurate." She said nothing. Ashford continued. "The hospital didn't want the investigation. I noticed. The doctor involved has connections." Sloane's voice stayed calm. "Patients should have connections too." Ashford stopped walking for a moment, then continued. "You were right to file it." She looked at him. "For the first time since the compound. And yet I'm unemployed." He had no answer. The team continued descending through the trees. The ravine appeared below them about 20 minutes later. Two camouflage trucks waited beneath the cover of thick jungle canopy. Almost there. Almost safe. Sloane was helping one of the hostages down a steep patch of dirt when the world cracked open. A gunshot tore through the ravine. Sharp. Violent. Harlow dropped instantly. Sloane's stomach dropped with him. "Contact," Weston shouted. But Sloane was already moving. Harlow lay on his back, blood pouring from his upper thigh. Bright red. Pulsing. Arterial. Femoral artery. The same wound her father had suffered 12 years earlier. The same wound that had taken 4 minutes to end a life. Her hands moved automatically. Tourniquet out. Strap around the thigh. Pull tight. Harlow's eyes were wide with shock. "Don't let me die," he whispered. Sloane twisted the windlass. Hard. The bleeding slowed, but didn't stop completely. "Stay with me," she said. Above them, another shot cracked against the rocks. Everyone dropped behind cover. Briggs scanned the ridge. "Second sniper," he shouted. Sloane looked up. The rock shelf above the ravine. Hidden until the last moment. Patient. Waiting for extraction. Her mind connected the terrain instantly. Eastern wall. Narrow ledge. Perfect firing angle. Her left hand stayed pressed against Harlow's leg. Her right hand lifted slowly, pointing toward the ridge. "Calm. Steady." "Eastern wall," she said. Briggs shifted the rifle. "I don't see him." "You will," Sloane replied. Her voice didn't shake, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. 6 inches above the rock gap, she said quietly. "Wait for him to settle." Briggs adjusted the scope. Silence stretched across the ravine. Wind brushed the tall grass. Harlow squeezed her arm weakly. "Doc." She leaned closer. "Nobody dies today." Then she spoke again. 1. Briggs shifted. 2. The sniper moved slightly above the rocks. Just enough. 3. The Barrett roared, and the mountain went silent again. Why did the sniper pull the trigger without asking another question, trusting the medic's voice more than his own eyes? The rifle's thunder rolled across the ravine and disappeared into the mountains. Then there was nothing. No return fire. No movement. Just the long echo fatting through the jungle like a door slowly closing. Briggs stayed behind the scope for several seconds anyway. Waiting. Watching. Breathing slow. Finally, he lowered the rifle. Target down. No celebration. Just a statement. The kind people make when they've done something necessary. Sloane barely heard him. Her attention was locked on Harlow. Blood had soaked deep into the fabric of his pants, but the tourniquet was holding. The bright pulsing spray had slowed to a heavy seep. That was the difference between minutes and seconds. Between life and silence. Her fingers pressed firmly above the wound. Stay with me, she said quietly. Harlow's face had turned pale beneath the jungle dust. You really mean that thing you said? He asked weakly. What thing? Nobody dies today. She tightened the tourniquet another half turn. I don't say things I do mean. He managed a crooked smile. Good. Weston and Drummond moved fast now, scanning the ridge while pulling the team into tighter cover. Any other shooters? Weston asked. Briggs swept the scope across the rock line again. Negative. But his voice carried caution. Snipers rarely worked alone. Drummond crouched beside Sloane. How bad? Femoral artery compromised, she said. Tourniquet applied, time mark 0927. She had already written it on Harlow's pant leg with a black marker. Standard procedure. Every second mattered. Drummond nodded once. How long do we have? If the tourniquet holds, enough. If it fails. She didn't answer, because the answer wasn't something anyone needed to hear. The hostages had pressed themselves low against the ravine wall. Ashford watched Sloane work with the intense focus of someone who understood exactly what he was witnessing. Not panic, not improvisation. Precision, the kind built from thousands of quiet hours learning how bodies break and how they can sometimes be pulled back from the edge. Vehicles, Weston said suddenly. The two camouflaged trucks waited 20 meters away beneath a web of jungle netting. They moved quickly. Briggs carried the rifle. Weston covered the ridge. Drummond helped Sloane lift Harlow into the back seat. The moment his weight shifted, the wound started bleeding harder again. Sloane reacted instantly. Her hands pressed down harder. Drive, she said. Drummond didn't argue. The engine roared to life. The truck lurched forward through the narrow jungle road. Every bump sent a jolt through Harlow's body. He gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. Sloane knelt beside him, one knee planted against the metal floor to steady herself. Her medical bag lay open. She worked fast. IV line into the arm. Fluid bag hanging from the grab handle above the door. Pressure maintained on the wound. Blood loss calculations running quietly in the back of her mind. How's he doing? Weston asked from the front seat. Still here. Doc, Harlow whispered. She leaned closer. Yeah. You ever notice the jungle smells weird? She blinked. What? Like dirt and bananas. Despite everything, Sloane almost smiled. That's probably the blood loss talking. Shame, he murmured. Thought I discovered something. His voice faded slightly. She squeezed his shoulder. Stay awake. Trying. Minutes crawled by. Outside, the jungle blurred past in green and shadow. Inside the truck, the air smelled like metal, sweat, and iron. Ashford sat across from them, holding the IV bag steady. He watched Sloane's hands with quiet intensity. You're not just a nurse, he said softly. No, she replied. I see that now. The truck bounced over a deep rut. Harlow groaned. Blood seeped again around the tourniquet. Not catastrophic, but dangerous. Sloane adjusted the windlass tighter. Harlow sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. Sorry, she said. Don't be. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling of the truck. You know what's funny? What? I used to hate running hills during training. She glanced at him. Now I'm thinking maybe they weren't so bad. You'll run them again, she said. He studied her face for a long moment. Then nodded. Okay. The forward operations site appeared nearly 40 minutes later. A cluster of low buildings surrounded by concertina wire and radio towers. The truck rolled through the gate and stopped hard. Sloane jumped down before the engine fully died. "Medical bay," she shouted. Two corpsemen rushed forward with a stretcher. But she shook her head. "Not a stretcher, table." They blinked. "What?" "Flat surface now." They dragged a heavy briefing table into the center of the room. Sloane helped lift Harlow onto it. Then the real work began. She cut open the fabric around the wound. Removed the tourniquet slowly. Blood surged again. Exactly as she expected. Her hands moved quickly. Pressure. Gauze packing. Clamp. More gauze. Every step precise. Every movement calm. Weston leaned against the wall watching. Briggs stood beside the door. Neither spoke. The room filled with the quiet rhythm of life-saving work. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Finally, the bleeding slowed. Stabilized. Contained. Sloane stepped back slightly. Her arms trembled now from exhaustion. But Harlow's pulse remained strong beneath her fingers. "Alive." Drummond entered the room. "How is he?" She removed her gloves slowly. "He's not dying today." Harlow opened one eye. "Told you," he whispered weakly. Someone in the room laughed softly. The tension cracked, just enough for people to breathe again. Ashford stepped forward. He watched Harlow for a moment. Then he turned to Sloane. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She wiped blood from her hands with a towel. "For what?" "For believing paperwork more than people." The room grew quiet. Ashford continued. "Your report about Leonard Doyle was correct." "I know. The hospital buried it." "I figured." He hesitated. "But it's not buried anymore." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "I reopened the case this morning," he said. "Before the helicopter came." Sloane studied him carefully. "And the investigation begins next week." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Not because she needed gratitude, but because justice had seemed unlikely. Distant. Ashford looked at the blood on the table. Then back at her. "You saved my life today," he said. "And the life of that man." He gestured toward Harlow. "I should have protected your career when you protected your patient." Sloane shook her head slightly. "You can't fix everything." "No," he said. "But some things deserve trying." Outside, the sun had begun to sink behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the compound. Inside the medical bay, Sloane finally sat down. For the first time in hours. Briggs walked over quietly. He placed the Barrett rifle against the wall beside her. "You called that shot perfectly," he said. "You didn't even see the target." "I saw the terrain," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "From now on," he said, "when you point somewhere, I'm already aiming." She leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally settling into her bones. Somewhere in the building, Harlow was laughing weakly with the corpsemen. "Alive." Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Not to sleep. Just to breathe. Because sometimes the difference between life and death wasn't strength, or speed, or even skill. Sometimes it was simply the quiet decision to stay steady when everything around you was breaking apart. Why did the sniper walk into the medical bay that night, carrying his rifle like it suddenly meant something different? The compound had gone quiet. Night in the mountains arrived fast. One moment the sky was deep orange behind the ridges. The next it was dark enough that the stars looked sharp enough to cut skin. Inside the medical bay, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Sloane Mercer sat on a metal chair beside the table where Harlow rested, The bleeding had stopped hours ago. His leg was wrapped, stabilized, and elevated. He was asleep now. Exhaustion had finally claimed him. Sloane hadn't slept. Her hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic and blood, even after scrubbing them 3 times. Sometimes that smell stayed longer than it should. Across the room, Weston leaned against the wall with his arms folded. He wasn't watching anything in particular. Just thinking. Operators had that habit. Listening to silence the way other people listen to music. The door creaked open. Briggs stepped inside. The Barrett rifle rested against his shoulder. He paused when he saw Sloane sitting there. "You're still awake," he said quietly. She glanced at the clock. "Adrenaline takes a while to leave." He nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Briggs walked over and placed the rifle carefully against the far wall. It looked different leaning there. Less like a weapon, more like a memory. He sat down on an empty crate across from her. "I've been thinking about that moment in the ravine," he said. Sloane raised an eyebrow slightly. "Which moment?" "The one where you told me where to shoot." She shrugged faintly. "You asked." "No," Briggs said slowly. "I didn't." She looked at him. "You just told me." The room was quiet except for the faint breathing of Harlow behind them. Briggs continued. "Most people would have been focused on the bleeding. I was. You were doing that while mapping terrain." Sloane leaned back slightly in the chair. "My father used to say something when I was learning to shoot." "What?" "The ground tells you where the danger wants to live." Briggs nodded slowly. "That's exactly what happened." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I didn't see the shooter." "But you saw the place where a shooter would be." "Yes." He looked toward Harlow for a moment. "Good thing you did." Silence settled again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Just reflective. Finally Briggs exhaled. "I owe you something else," he said. Sloane tilted her head slightly. "What?" "An apology." "For what?" "For the first 2 days." She smiled faintly. "You mean when you were testing me like I was a suspicious new recruit?" "Exactly. And now? Now I think we got lucky." She chuckled quietly. "Lucky?" "Yes." He gestured toward Harlow. "You saved a man while directing sniper fire." He paused. "Most teams don't get someone who can do both." Sloane looked at the sleeping man on the table. "I didn't do both," she said. "I just refused to stop doing one to do the other." Briggs leaned back against the crate. "That's a very different way of thinking." "It's a medic's way of thinking." He nodded slowly. Across the room Weston finally spoke. "You know what the strange part is?" Both of them looked at him. Weston shrugged. "None of us questioned her when she pointed." Briggs frowned. "You noticed that too?" Weston nodded. "In a firefight people usually demand confirmation." But nobody did. Sloane looked between them. "Why?" Weston smiled slightly. "Because the tone of your voice didn't leave room for doubt." Briggs laughed softly. "That's true." Sloane didn't answer. Because the truth was, she had been terrified. Not outwardly, but deep inside. The kind of fear that sits quietly in the chest like a cold stone. The fear of watching someone bleed out while knowing exactly how it ends. Her father had died from a wound almost identical to Harlow. Same artery. Same clock ticking down. She had carried that knowledge for 12 years. And in the ravine, the past had suddenly been standing in front of her again. But this time she had been ready. The door opened again. Master Chief Drummond stepped inside. He carried a folder under one arm. "You're all still awake," he said. "No point sleeping yet," Weston replied. Drummond walked over to Sloane and handed her the folder. "After action report," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside were typed pages describing the entire mission. Insertion, approach, contact, extraction. Every moment documented. Her eyes moved down the page until she reached a section halfway through. Medical response and support. The report described her treatment of Harlow's wound. The timing, the tourniquet, the stabilization. Then a separate paragraph caught her attention. Sniper support action. It described how she had identified the secondary sniper's position and directed the countershot. Sloane looked up. "You included this." Drummond shrugged. "It happened, but I'm not on your team. You were today." Briggs chuckled quietly. She kind of forced her way onto it. Drummond smiled faintly. "There's another page." Sloane turned the paper. At the bottom was a short recommendation. Integrated Combat Medic Certification, Field Evaluation Approved. She looked up. "What's this?" Drummond leaned against the table. "It's a program proposal we've been testing. For people who can operate medically and tactically." She stared at the paper. "You're offering me a position. I'm offering you a chance to do exactly what you did today, more often." The room grew quiet again. Sloane looked down at the report. At the words describing the ravine. The blood. The tourniquet. The shot. Then she glanced at Harlow. Alive. Breathing steadily. Finally she closed the folder. "I'll think about it," she said. Drummond nodded. "That's all I'm asking." He turned toward the door. But before leaving he paused. "One more thing." Sloane looked up. "I knew your father a long time," he said quietly. "He used to say something about medics." "What?" "He said the strongest warriors he ever met were the ones who spent their time fighting death instead of people." Drummond opened the door. "And today I saw exactly what he meant." The door closed softly behind him. Sloane sat there for a long time afterward. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and mountain air drifting through the cracked window. Briggs eventually stood and picked up the Barrett rifle again. But this time when he slung it over his shoulder, he glanced at Sloane first. Not with skepticism. With respect. Sometimes trust didn't arrive with loud words. Sometimes it appeared quietly, after someone proved who they were when the moment mattered most. And in the quiet medical bay that night, Sloane Mercer finally allowed herself one slow breath of relief. Because for the first time since stepping onto that helicopter, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not just purpose. Belonging. Why did 18 young corpsmen fall completely silent the moment Sloane Mercer walked into the classroom? It wasn't because of her rank. She didn't have much of one. And it wasn't because of her reputation, either. Most of them had only heard fragments of the story. A medic. A mountain mission. A sniper shot. A man who should have died but didn't. Stories grow strange in military corridors. Pieces get lost. Details get exaggerated. But when Sloane stepped through the door, the room quieted anyway. Maybe it was the way she moved. Calm, unhurried. Like someone who had already seen the worst day a person could face and survived it. The classroom at Bethesda Naval Medical Center smelled like fresh paint and dry erase markers. Morning sunlight slipped through tall windows and fell across the rows of desks where 18 corpsmen sat waiting. Some looked eager. Some looked nervous. A few carried the same skeptical expression Sloane had once seen in Briggs' eyes. She recognized it immediately. Healthy doubt. Not arrogance. Just the quiet question every soldier asks when someone new steps into their world. Can you really do this when it matters? Sloane set a small canvas bag on the front table. Her medical kit. The same one she had carried into the mountains 6 months earlier. The same one still holding the black marker she had used to write a time on Harlow's leg. 0927. She hadn't thrown it away. Some things deserved remembering. Behind her, the whiteboard held 3 words written in dark ink. Integrate. Adapt. Bring them home. She looked at the students. 18 faces. 18 futures she couldn't predict. But she knew something about all of them already. Every one of them would eventually stand somewhere terrible, holding someone else's life in their hands. The room stayed quiet. Finally, Sloane spoke. "Before we start," she said calmly, "I want to ask you a question." No one moved. "If a teammate takes a round to the femoral artery, how long do you have?" A young corpsman in the front row answered carefully. 3 to 5 minutes, ma'am." Sloane nodded slightly. "Correct." She paused. "But the truth is, you don't have 5. She picked up the marker and wrote a number beneath the words on the board. 4 minutes. "That's how long my father had," she said. The students looked up. Some of them shifted slightly in their seats. Sloane continued. 12 years ago, he was wounded during a patrol. Upper thigh, femoral artery. There was no medic available." She let the silence sit there. Heavy, real. 4 minutes later, he was gone. No one spoke. Finally, she capped the marker and set it down. "That's why this course exists." She walked slowly along the front of the room. "You're here because modern combat doesn't separate jobs the way textbooks do. You might be a medic. You might be a rifleman. You might be both at the same time." Her eyes moved across the class. "And sometimes, the person bleeding is the one who normally carries the medical kit." She stopped beside the table and unzipped the canvas bag. Inside lay tourniquets, gauze, clamps, syringes. Simple tools. But in the right hands, they could bend time. She lifted a tourniquet and held it up. "This," she said quietly, "is the difference between 4 minutes and forever." A few students leaned forward slightly. Now they were listening with more than curiosity. They were listening with urgency. Sloane set the tourniquet down. Then she said something she hadn't planned. 6 months ago, I was sitting beside a man who had exactly the same wound." She paused. "And I knew exactly how it would end if I got even one step wrong." A hand slowly raised near the back of the room. Sloane nodded. "Yes." The young corpsman spoke hesitantly. "Did he make it?" Sloane allowed herself a small smile. The classroom door creaked open. Harlow stepped inside. He walked normally now. Only a faint stiffness remained in his stride. The room turned toward him. He lifted the leg of his pants slightly and tapped the scar running along his thigh. "Still here," he said. The class laughed softly. The tension broke. Sloane glanced at him. "You're late," she said. "Traffic." He dropped into a chair at the back of the room. "Continue." Sloane turned back to the students. "This course isn't about turning medics into heroes," she said. "It's about making sure the right knowledge shows up when someone needs it." She picked up the marker again. Beneath the first 3 words, she wrote another sentence. "Heal when you can, fight when you must." "My father told me that when I was 12, she said. "And everything you'll learn here grows from that idea." The class began after that. tourniquet drills, rapid trauma assessments, improvised stabilization, situations where combat and medicine blurred together. For hours the room filled with movement and questions, and the sound of people learning something that might someday save a life. When the session finally ended, the students slowly filed out. A few stayed behind to ask questions. Others simply nodded respectfully before leaving. Harlow lingered near the doorway. "You did good," he said. "Thanks. You scared them a little." "Good." He chuckled. "That's fair." Eventually the room emptied. Sloane gathered her notes and slipped the tourniquet back into the bag. The sunlight had shifted now, stretching long across the floor. She walked outside into the cool afternoon air. Her car waited in the parking lot beneath a row of quiet trees. Before getting inside, she paused. From her pocket, she pulled out the folded letter her father had written years ago. The paper had grown softer with time, but the ink was still clear. She read the final line once more. "If the moment ever comes when people need you more than they doubt you, go." Sloane folded the letter carefully. Across the parking lot, Harlow raised a hand in goodbye before climbing into his truck. She smiled faintly and returned the gesture. Then she looked toward the distant horizon. Somewhere out there another team would one day move through another mountain valley. Another medic would kneel beside someone bleeding into the dirt. Another 4-minute clock would begin to tick. And maybe, just maybe, one of the students from today's classroom would remember the lesson. The calm voice, the tourniquet, the quiet promise. Because sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't wear medals or stand on stages. Sometimes it simply kneels in the dirt beside someone who is running out of time and refuses to let the story end there. Because dignity doesn't argue. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply acts.